I am continuing in my reading. What I'm doing in this series is to read through the entire standard works of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This consists of the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. I am continuing reading in a chronological order, according to event, not according to publication or volume, so I'm skipping around a bit as I move along. Continuing with the Gospels again. So far, Christ, he's been baptized. He went down to Jerusalem for the Passover and taught Nicodemus, but the Jews are now seeking his life. So he has left the Judea area and gone back to Galilee, where he is performing many miracles. He is rejected in Nazareth, his hometown, and has gone to Capernaum. And while he is on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, he calls Simon and Andrew and James and John to the ministry. Now in Luke, he calls it the Lake of Gennesaret, which is just the Sea of Galilee, but that would be more of a Gentile name for it, and Luke is a Gentile, which makes sense. But that's where we left it. In this video, we have a Joseph Smith translation. Now what the Joseph Smith translation is, this is a translation or correction done by Joseph Smith to restore those passages that have been lost or corrupted over the years. And now we're going to pick this up. This video we're going to read in both Mark and Luke, just these two. The story is shared by just the two Gospels. So we're going to read in Mark first. Mark chapter 1. We're going to read verses 21 through 28. And they went into Capernaum, and straightway on the Sabbath day he entered into the synagogue and taught. And they were astonished at his doctrine, for he taught them as one that had authority, and not as the scribes. And there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, saying, Let us alone! What have we to do with thee, thou Jesus of Nazareth? Art thou come to destroy us? I know thee who thou art, the Holy One of God. And Jesus rebuked him, saying, Hold thy peace, and come out of him. And when the unclean spirit had torn him, and cried with a loud voice, he came out of him. And they were all amazed, insomuch that they questioned among themselves, saying, What thing is this? What new doctrine is this? For with authority commandeth he even the unclean spirits, and they do obey him. And immediately his fame spread abroad throughout all the region round about Galilee. Christ has already done many miracles, but it seems that he's mainly been healing people, curing the blind, the lame, those kind of things. This is the first time that he commands an unclean spirit. This means a devil. An unclean spirit is just a devil. He's one of the hosts of heaven that was cast out in the war in heaven. Now, why was it identifying Christ, and why did Christ rebuke it and tell it to shut up? Well, from what I gather, first of all, it's an unclean spirit, even if nobody's going to really believe him, and it might actually reduce the credibility. It might hurt his ministry if you have a bunch of devils testifying of him, because people don't trust devils, like they shouldn't. But it's also, the guy was being rowdy, being noisy, boisterous. He was disrupting the meeting. This is at the synagogue on the Sabbath. They're having their church meeting, and just somebody random in the audience starts standing up and yelling and screaming at Christ. Yet Christ tells him to sit down and shut up, and he calls the spirit out of him so that the meeting can continue in relative peace. But it seems to me that commanding an unclean spirit is something more than just healing. There may have been other prophets who healed, but at least at this time, these people have never known a prophet who could command the unclean spirits. This is something a little better than just healing. And I would also point out, when it says he taught as one having authority and not as the scribes. The scribes, they would read the scriptures and say, look, this is what the scriptures say. This is what the prophets of old have said. But Christ doesn't do that. Christ does read the scriptures, but he teaches his doctrine. He speaks as if he is the authority, not the scriptures. Because he's God. He's got the authority. He is the ultimate authority. The scribes would direct you to the scriptures as the authority. But Christ says, I am the authority. Now, I will say the prophets of old spoke in the same way. When Elijah came and sealed the heavens, he spoke with authority because he had authority. The scribes don't have the priesthood. They don't have authority. And at this time, it's been 200 years since there had been a prophet among Israel. Nobody had this authority for a couple of centuries. These people had never met a man with this authority. And now Christ is coming among them. It's something it's surprising and somewhat shocking. It's kind of like when Joseph Smith declared his authority in the last days, and all the other Christians were, you can't do that. That authority doesn't exist anymore. So the Jews kind of had the same idea. Now the Jews were looking forward That they thought there would be more problems. They knew Elijah was coming back. They understood all this, but they weren't expecting it in Christ. Now, let us quickly look at the Joseph Smith translation for Mark. So the only Joseph Smith translation for Mark here is in verse 28, where it says, throughout all the region round about Galilee. Joseph Smith simply pluralizes. Throughout all the regions. Nothing too important. So now let us turn to Luke chapter 4, verses 33 through 37. And in the synagogue there was a man which had a spirit of an unclean devil, and cried out with a loud voice, saying, Let us alone! What have we to do with thee, thou Jesus of Nazareth? Art thou come to destroy us? I know thee who thou art, the Holy One of God. And Jesus rebuked him, saying, Hold thy peace, and come out of him. And when the devil had thrown him in the midst, he came out of him, and hurt him not. And they were all amazed, and spake among themselves, saying, What a word is this? For with authority and power he commandeth the unclean spirits, and they come out. And the fame of him went out into every place of the country round about. The exact same story, the quote of the unclean spirit and what Christ says, word for word. The story is just told in a slightly different way. But there's no new information, except it does say that the man that was possessed is unharmed. That's always a nice little detail to know. Which is something that Luke, being a physician, would be more likely to mention. Saying, yes, Christ was able to pull this unclean spirit out without harming the man who was possessed. Makes sense for a physician to be the one to comment on that. But since there's really nothing new there, let us just turn to the Joseph Smith translation and see what that says. Just some minor grammatical corrections, or more updates than corrections, Instead of which had a spirit of an unclean devil, it's who had a spirit of an unclean devil. And in verse 34, what have we to do with thee, thou Jesus of Nazareth? We just remove the thou, it's kind of redundant. In verse 36, they were all amazed and spake among themselves. Joseph Smith, amongst themselves. I don't know, Joseph Smith kind of turned that back to a more archaic statement. But anyways, and lastly in verse 37, and the fame of him went out into every place of the country round about. Joseph Smith makes it a little simpler. And the fame of him went out in every place round about. Minor grammatical changes, nothing important. But this is the first time that Christ casts out an unclean spirit. He'll do it many times after this, of course, but this is the first time, and it is amazing to those who see it. But we continue with more of these combination videos, so I will see you in the next one.